Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the match preview with me, Andrew Musgrove, and John Gibson. Newcastle head down to Goodison Park on Saturday evening to face Everton. A fixture that fills me with dread. It might fill John with dread. It certainly might fill you guys with dread because Everton have come a bit of a sticky opposition for Newcastle of late, but we'll get into that as the show goes on. John, first and foremost, how are you keeping? Are you well?
I'm very well after the shock of Fulham. It's turned out to be quite a good week with a very good draw and an even better performance against the champions and through to the last 16 of the League Cup. However turgid that might have been, the bottom line is all that matters. And we've drawn with the champions and got a bit of a room back, and we're in the last 16. So we're heading towards the international break, and we just want one more positive result to take in a very happy mood into that break.
Yeah, most certainly. So, and you mentioned there that defeat to Fulham. We said a response is needed. We got it against City. We got the result against AFC Wimbledon. And it's all about building momentum and building confidence, isn't it? And yes, there is criticisms over what we saw on Tuesday, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that as the show goes on as well. But just to keep that winning feeling going, or the unbeaten feeling going, is what counts.
Yeah, absolutely so. And yes, we know what happened on Tuesday night, and it wasn't pretty, etc., etc. But in a way, it was never going to be. You were playing a League Cup tie against a League Two side who are very good defensively week in, week out, and came here to survive and did it very, very well. But subconsciously as well, when you're in the situation you're in, once you're ahead, you think the game we've won it anyway. And of course, we made 8 changes and we made 2 more at half time, etc., etc. So there wasn't any fluidity about it. What mattered was the result. And what mattered even more important is what happened against Manchester City, because we needed that big time. And, I'd go as far as to say that was our best performance of the season. It mightn't be the best result in as much as we beat Spurs, but it was a much better performance. And, that heartened me greatly going into this one. And this one is ever so important because we want to finish off the week with a flourish. We want to go into a fortnight's international break on a high. But above all else, 3 points will not be just most welcome, but in some ways could be deemed necessary because immediately we resume action. We've got Brighton, Chelsea, and Arsenal to come in the league. So, out of those three plus Everton, you would say the easiest one is Everton. Brighton are a good side, but they can have a soft underbelly. But the easier one's Everton. So let's get 3 points as a bit of a cushion because Chelsea and Arsenal will certainly be tough.
Yeah, no, most certainly so. I think the important thing about that City performance is that they need to follow it up. So if we kind of write off Tuesday because there was 8 changes and it was a bit of a weird feeling going into the game and what have you. I mean,
Yeah,
we will speak about it, but in terms of the Premier League, I think the performance against City is only worth shouting about if they follow it up with a win against Everton, because then you're looking back and you're thinking, well, whether you've lost to Everton, but you perform like that against City. So is it a mentality thing? What's the issue here? For what it's worth, I think they'll get at least a point at Everton, but I want to see a good performance. The ideal world to get all 3 points, but we need to see the really good elements of what we saw against City down at Goodison Park as well.
yeah, I think that's unquestionably true. And I found it interesting saying, that we've got to follow it up against Everton and get something, which is absolutely correct. And with at least a point, i.e., not lose. But I mean, what I remember, which is lovely, how apprehensive you were facing City. I mean, you were talking about a chonking, and when I mentioned it all, and they only scored 1 and 4, you said I've put them on a hat trick. And so Holland didn't notch. It's 1 and 5 now for the big man, who loves to bully people, but it's very difficult to bully Big Dan Burn because there's only Gray's Monument could bully great Big Dan Burn, and Holland wasn't able to do that. And yes, I thought we would probably get a narrow defeat with honour, but we did even better than that. And the apprehension that you had, and a lot of Geordies had, because Fulham had put a lot of apprehension there, and so had the previous games in terms of the performance. I thought it was terrific throughout the 90 minutes. And by the way, when we bear in mind, Andrew, that when we got to the ground and learned Isaac wasn't playing as well, that heaped more sort of doom and gloom onto our shoulders, because we didn't have an orthodox centre forward to replace Isaac. So all in all, it was a terrific performance, and it was a terrific result, because I felt we'd played so well until we went one down, and I thought that's going to knock the stuffing out of us. We haven't got half time, which we looked like doing, and it didn't knock the stuffing out of us. We went again in the second half, and we thoroughly justified our draw. And if we nicked it, I don't know that they could have complained.
No, I think Sean Longstaff had a really good chance at the end, and it probably should have gone into the back of the net. And had they got that goal, Newcastle would have deserved all 3 points, in my opinion. But yes, John's right to remind me of my fear going into the game against Manchester City, and I was so glad to be proved wrong. And you're right, Newcastle put in not only the performance of the season, but I think one of their best performances of the entire year, really. And if we look back to some of the runs that went on towards the end of last season, this performance was up there. Part of me I think Everton is a big game in terms of the performance, because I think what I need to see, and I'm sure a lot of you guys watching and listening need to see, is to prove that Newcastle haven't got a mentality issue against the lower sides, against the sides that they should be beaten. It's all good going to places, like Wolves or Bournemouth or what have you, and scraping a win or scraping a point and not playing well. But as I've said all season, that's not sustainable. What we need to see is Newcastle United go to these places, go to teams they should be beating, and actually beating them. So with Everton next up after Manchester City, I think it's a really important game to prove that they can go to these places and they can do what's expected of them. Because it feels to me, John, that for certain, for a large part of the fan base, and like I'm not having to go at anyone, Newcastle United are often one defeat or one bad performance away from becoming a crisis club. And it doesn't need to be that way, but football is full of emotions, and I understand, the knee-jerk reactions that sometimes comes out of a bad performance. But I do think Saturday needs to be a good performance. Ideally, it needs to be a win, just to make people a little bit more comfortable about the direction this season's heading in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And for the other two reasons that I already mentioned, Andrew, which is you don't want to go into a fortnight international break on a defeat against a club like Everton. You definitely don't. And we also need something of a cushion, because the next three league games are Brighton, Chelsea, and Arsenal. Now, I would think would beat Brighton up here, because however attractive they are, etc., they've got a soft underbelly, the same as I think Spurs have a soft underbelly. So I think we can get a result there. But Chelsea away and Arsenal at home ain't going to be any pushover. So, if we get a draw with Arsenal, like we got a draw with Man City, you might think that's a good result. But it's another reason why we need 3 points banked off Everton before we go into these games. And then I've talked about it in the Chronicle and my written stuff, have been a must-win game on Saturday, and smiled and said, "How often do we say that? And is it always like that? And why is it like that?" In my answer to why is it like that, answer my own question, is because however great that result was against Man City, we've got 1 point out of the last six. Then we've got Everton, followed by those three tough games. So you need the cushion of 3 points at Everton, and we should go for the jugular and go for the 3 points. And 1 point away from home and win it at home is a good formula, but not in this case. I think we have to go with the intention and, above all, the attitude to beat to beat Everton. And I'll tell you what, if we go with the attitude we had against Manchester City, we will beat Everton. If we go with the attitude we had at Fulham, we will lose to Everton.
Do you think that we will see them build on what we saw against Manchester City? Do you sit there and you're confident that Newcastle will bring their A game and they will beat Everton on Saturday?
To a certain extent, confidence, not quite the word, hopeful, believe it, but confident is like you almost past the post. And I can still remember Fulham. I think that with hindsight, the team talk was very easy for Eddie against Manchester City. It basically boiled down to everybody, and I'm not talking just about Geordies, but the wider world, everybody it was critical of Fulham. Everybody's writing Newcastle off as this team this season that hasn't played well once and is not what they think they are, etc. So go out and prove a point. And is there a better match to prove a point in than against the habitual champions? And we do raise our game in those games, but we need to do it against sides like Fulham. And yes, I mean I don't think that Eddie will let them get the cigars out just because they got a draw with Manchester City. Because, as I say, if I was Eddie, I'd be pointing out, yes, we were wonderful and that's what we want. And we've set the benchmark and it's very high. But we've got to 1 point out the last six and we've got these tough games to come. So let's not come back from Goodison realizing that we were narrowly beaten. We've got a fortnight to brood over it, and then we're really up against it when we start playing again. Because in that mix of Brighton, Chelsea, and Arsenal, you've got Chelsea twice in the League Cup. So the next four games are a bit tasty after Everton. So, we've got to keep the feel good factor going. And the only way to do that is to win at Everton. To a certain extent, if you draw at Everton, you keep it going because you haven't lost and you've only lost one game all season. But it's not quite good enough. I mean, I want them to go down there and show the grit and determination because if they do, Everton are struggling. They won their last game, but that was the first win of the season. And in front of their own crowd, we can make them the crowd and the team very, very edgy. And that's what we've got to do.
Yeah, no, we do. And I spoke to an Everton fan for The View from the Opposition, which will be coming out on Friday morning. And he was talking about how Newcastle United can turn the game in their favour. And it's by dominating possession, dominating play, and then obviously making that pay and getting the crowd worked up. And he says Sean Dyche isn't necessarily in a favourable position. He has his supporters, but it doesn't take much for maybe a few vocal supporters to tell him what they think. So there is a little bit of unhappiness there, it seems, at Goodison. But what was interesting was the fact that he mentioned to me that Everton are not a possession-based side, so Newcastle are likely to have the majority of the ball. And I don't know about you, John. I still think Newcastle are best when they have to absorb and hit teams on the counter. Now, we saw on Tuesday they had 79% possession or something like that against the FC Wimbledon, and they just could not break Wimbledon down. Wimbledon came with a game plan. They'd sit in, they'd invite Newcastle on, and if they could break, they would do. And Newcastle were just passing it back, side to side, and they struggled. Now, if they have to do the same against Everton on Saturday, it's going to have to be a bit of an improvement. I know he made 8 changes and what have you, and the team he'll pick on Saturday will click better because that's the majority will have played with each other. So you're not feeling your way in. But I do worry if Newcastle have to have the majority of possession, are they going to be good enough, and are they going to be able to make are they going to be able to turn it into goals and a win?
Well, I mean, that's something they've got to do. That's what you face in life. And that's if you want to be a top team, i.e., top four Champions League or top seven, top six Europe, then you've got to be capable of doing that. We know what Everton are going to be. With utmost respect to the gentleman you were talking to, if when you where you are, which is right in the relegation fight and in the bottom five or something, you're not a possession-based side. You don't pass people to death. You're struggling. You can't turn the crowd against the manager because it's a big club. Everton see themselves as big a club as we see Newcastle United. That's the way the Everton fans view it. They're seeing themselves habitually in a relegation fight. They don't necessarily blame the managers because they blame the owners. rather than the managers, and that's about to change. So there's a little bit of optimism around town because new owners are about to come in. They're about to get a new stadium. But in the meantime, who can have a go at? Have a go at Sean Dyche, have a go at whoever the manager is because he's standing on the touchline. We can take advantage of that. But they're not going to pass teams off the pitch. They never do. They can't do it. They haven't got good enough players to pass people off the pitch. So yes, we're going to have a lot of the ball. I don't think we're going to have as much of the ball as we had against Wimbledon when we had virtually 80%, because they've got a little bit more about them than that. And I do think it'll be a different performance because of the people involved than it was against Wimbledon, because you'll have Gordon from the start. You're going to have centre midfield. Tonali will be back, who will set a much better tempo in the middle of the park than we had against Wimbledon, and presumably Guimaraes and Joe Linton will respond to that either side of them, and those three will look what they are. So I take the point that often we are better as a counter attacking side. Um, but we have faced, and certainly we even beat Spurs at home as a counter-attacking side. They had all the possession. But we have had a lot of possession at home because you get it at home against the more moderate sides, and you've got to overcome that. That's what life's all about. And we should have the locksmiths. If you look at the front three and you look at the midfield three, we should have the locksmiths to unpick the lock um, over a whole hour and a half.
Yeah.
Because we only got to win, we only got to score once if we keep them out, and we've got 3 points, and we'd hope for better than that. But that would do me.
Yeah, you'll take a win, whatever the score, wouldn't you? You mentioned there the front three, Alexander Isak, more likely than not to be missing due to that broken toe. So it would be probably Gordon up front, Barnes out on the left, and then you would suggest Jacob Murphy out on the right, who I thought was really good against Manchester City. Gordon is the interesting one because you think back to the last time he went to Goodison, the game totally passed him by. He was really poor, and he actually got subbed off. I think early in the second half, if my memory serves me correct. So I think he struggled with the atmosphere and the occasion. Obviously, we're about 8 months on from that game. He's matured. He's had experiences, in the summer, and he's had a tough time, shall we say, in the opening weeks of the season, John. But great against City, nearing that new contract. Will he be up for this game, and will we see the true Anthony Gordon? Not the one that we saw the last time he visited Goodison?
Interesting. I do think Andy Gordon will be centre forward on Saturday. Isak's not going to play. I mean, from Newcastle's point of view, he would be a huge risk anyway. But they're very cautious about injuries now. A, because James Bunce has arrived, and that's his speciality, and B, because we suffered badly last season when we tried to bring players back too quick, and Bachmann played on when he shouldn't have played on, etc. Now, what you want is Isak to have the next fortnight is rest. That's what you want to get him fit. You cannot have him resting and not playing for Sweden if he plays at Everton, because Sweden will say, wait a minute, you've just played him. We want him for the internationals. Newcastle don't want him to go to the internationals, and quite right, because it's a genuine injury. So you missed 3 games for Newcastle, which Man City, League Cup, and Everton, and you missed the 2 for Sweden, and then you come back. So there's no chance of him playing at Everton. Sula will not start at Everton. I'm not saying he won't get on, but he won't start. He is what he is. He's a lad full of potential. He's a 19-year-old. He's quick, but he's not Premier League class. And I mean, we saw the good, the bad, and the ugly in midweek. It will be Anthony Gordon, who played 9 absolutely magnificently against City. Although we've got to say straight away, I mean, what he did wonderful against City was running in behind, relentless probing, on his bike the whole game. They hated all that. But the bottom line is that he's not a 25-goal centre forward like Isak. And of course, that means he doesn't play on the wing. And Barnes is not as productive goals apart as Gordon on the left wing. Because if he was, Barnes would be in the England side ahead of Gordon, and he isn't. So, we suffer two things. We haven't got Gordon outside left and we haven't got Isaac centre forward. So we suffer. But it's very, very interesting, isn't it? Because he's going to get dogs abuse. There's absolutely, and he's got to show the sort of courage he shows on the field when he's getting tackled. Because I tell you what, he goes outside and inside against the fullback. He absolutely crucifies them. He doesn't give them a moment's rest. If they kick him, he just gets back up and plays on after 16 forward rolls, of course, but he still gets back up and plays on. You can't kick him out of it. Now, it's a totally different courage when you're getting dogs abuse from the terraces with about 30,000 having to go at him, which is what he'll get for absolute certain on Saturday. And you know what I find fascinating, Andrew, about Saturday's game? It's two guys against each other who are absolutely hated by the opposition fans because the Everton fans hate Gordon because I think he manufactured his move to Newcastle, and then they remember that although he was born in Liverpool, he's a Liverpool fan, not an Everton fan. So they absolutely hate him. And we absolutely hate Jordan Pickford because he's a Mackem who winds up the Newcastle fans, and the Newcastle fans wind up him. So there's two England teammates are going to face each other, Gordon and Pickford, hated by the other section of the crowd. I mean, Pickford will get the dog's abuse of Newcastle fans that Gordon will get from the Everton fans. Only trouble is there's 17 times more Everton fans, so Gordon's going to face it. But he's got to show the courage he shows when faced with opposing defenders on the field. He's got to show that courage when faced by a crowd that are going to hate him because he knows what he's going to get. But and by the way, he's a proud man. He's playing for England. A lot of people will look at him in this game, from the England manager to the people sitting on the settees at match of the day to the Newcastle United fans, and they look at him to see what his bottle is. They know what he is, quality player. They know his bottle in taking tackles. Now let's say his bottle in a hostile situation. Because what he must remember, Anthony, is they can hate him as much as they like, but they're not going to come on the field and tackle him because they can't. So just get on with it. And the best way to make your point is produce a performance and stick the ball in the back of the net, especially past the Mackem.
Yeah, yep, we'll take that most definitely. And we saw on Tuesday, as we've said, 8 changes, but they still had Fabian Scherf on the off, Joe Linton, and a couple of others as well, who started from kickoff. And then we saw the introduction of Bruno. We saw the introduction of a few others as well. With those players who featured started on Tuesday and are likely to start from the off on Saturday, would they have welcomed those minutes on Tuesday, do you think, John?
Not particularly. I'm thinking if Joe Linton, they realise that you've got the job to do, and therefore you do it because look at it another way. They'll not be objecting if they go to Wembley, will they? And they had to win that game to get to it, to have any chance of getting to Wembley. So it had to be done. There was only 3 that started from the Man City game, wasn't it? There was only 3 that actually started.
Yeah.
We then got people like Guimaraes and Anthony Gordon coming on, etc. But I mean, people like Trippier and were just not in Pope, were just not even in the squad. But I mean, I would expect to go back. You see, there's also the difficulty, it's subconscious. So much of the game is played in the mind, Andrew. The rest of it is played on the grass, but so much of it's played in the mind. And it doesn't matter how much you tell players that, yeah, this is a huge game, and if we're going to go to Wembley, we've got to wait. You cannot get out of your mind you're playing League Two opposition, and then an hour and a half later you ought to be through. And when you go 1-up, even with a penalty, you subconsciously think we've won. They're not going to score against us. And they're certainly not going to score 2 against us. It's subconscious. It's not correct. I'm not making excuses. It shouldn't happen. But we're all human. And in the same way as you didn't really have to give a team speech to get a performance against Man City, because if you've got any pride, you want that to happen. It's very difficult to get rid of a feeling that this opposition, I cannot see us losing. I mean, before the game, I couldn't see us losing to Wimbledon. I didn't think it would be as turgid as it was. I mean, I think it bordered on being boring and dull. Well, it didn't border on it; it was boring and dull. But it's very difficult not to have that. The one thing they won't have at Everton is a feeling it'll be easy. Like subconsciously, there would be a feeling that we will beat Wimbledon come what may. There won't be that feeling about Everton because they know they can get the trousers taken down in the bottom spank if they go with the wrong attitude. But if they go with the right attitude, man for man, we have better players than Everton, so we win. The only reason why we don't win is if we have the wrong attitude.
Yeah, no, I think everyone will agree with you there. They've got to go in with the right mindset, and they will know that Goodison is a tough place to go. I mean, Everton, though they've conceded 15 goals this season, we've seen that remarkable run where they conceded late on in two consecutive games and threw the games away, which shows you that maybe they can't hold their nerve right until the final whistle, which is something that if Newcastle need to take advantage of, I'm sure they will do. Let's just quickly run through your team then, John. Nick Pope, we hope, overcomes this swelling that Eddie Howe talked about after the Wimbledon game, so he would get the nod. The back four, who are you picking?
Well, I mean, to be truthful, and this kills us off going man to man, but I will go through. I'm picking the side that started against Man City.
Yeah, I thought you might.
So I'm going Trippier, Shaw, Byrne, and Hall, who I thought was absolutely fabulous and had his best game for us. The midfield three that we always thought would be the midfield three, I'm talking about in the summer, if Tonali with Bruno and Joe Linton, and I'd go with Murphy, who I agree with you, I thought was excellent, Gordon and Bonds. And that, you know what, out of that lot, if I had, taken injuries apart, we're presuming that Trippier is going to be okay there, etc., etc. And if not, it's Livramento if he was unfit. But injuries apart, presuming everybody's fit that we expect to be fit, apart from the long-term guys, the guy that's disappointed me the most on a wonderful day against it is Harvey Barnes. I thought he was very average against Man City, and on a wonderful day for Newcastle, and he was offered off time against them against Wimbledon. Harvey Barnes. The first thing, if somebody says to me, Harvey Barnes, what's the first thing I think of? It's goals. It's coming in, opening his body up and sticking it in the far corner. I don't think much of his play. Now, I think when people mention Andy Gordon to me, the first thing I see is him running at the fullback who doesn't know if he's going inside or outside and torturing people. I don't think of Harvey Barnes so much in his build-up play. I think finishing. So when he doesn't finish, sometimes fans can go home and say, did you see Harvey Barnes today? Did he do anything? I can't remember much of Harvey Barnes. He's that sort of player, isn't he? And I think if there was any one player, and by the way, I don't. If the 11 against City, they would be under pressure for his place at Everton. It would be Harvey Barnes. But I don't think anybody produced a good enough performance against Wimbledon to put the original 11 under any pressure whatsoever, because the star man by a million miles was Fabian Shaw, who's already in the side against Wimbledon. So I don't know that you would say, I'll drop Harvey Barnes playing Gordon centre forward and I'll play Murphy and Almiron as your two wide men. I think you would play Barnes.
It's
Or
that
would you
age-old.
play Almiron?
No, I'd pick the same team that played against Man City. I thought Almiron showed that energy and showed the purpose that we know he's got against, he showed that against Wimbledon, but again, just lacking that end product. So yeah, I wouldn't be bringing him in to replace Murphy because Murphy was my
No,
man
I
of the match
meant
against
to
Man City.
replace Burns and
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I'd keep Barnes. I think the Barnes debate will go on and on until he either starts scoring consecutively from the off, or Eddie Howe makes a decision, says he's an impact substitution. But I think, look, if Ashley Young's the right back for Everton on Saturday evening, then you say Harvey Barnes, you wind him up and you let him go because there really shouldn't be any contest between those two. I mean, and then, Ashley Young might have to play left back, so it would be him up against Murphy, which again, no, Murphy against City showed some real speed about him. And if he goes up in a foot race against Young again, you would think there's only one winner. So I think the full-back situation for Everton is certainly something that Newcastle can exploit, and you will hope that both Barnes and Murphy can do that. But I'm looking forward to the game, John. I am. How is it going to go?
Results-wise,
Yeah.
good question. I mean, the first thing you say is that we must not lose because that would be a catastrophe. And I think I might have said that down at Fulham. And we went and did exactly that. But I mean, I would also admit, Andrew, I'd be slightly disappointed with a draw. That's not having watched the game. If we'd had two people sent off and we were 2 down and we got back to 2-2, I would think it was marvellous. But no, I think we've got to go for a win. You've got to win away from home. If you're going to make Europe, you've got to win a few matches away from home, not the odd one, but a few matches away from home, because your home form is automatic if you're going to be top 4 or top 7. I'm taking us to win a tight match by a goal, 2-1 perhaps, by a single goal, a tight match, not necessarily pretty, because Everton don't do pretty and they don't want any other side to be pretty. They'll be ugly and try to make us, drag us down to be ugly with them and then get a result out of it. But I'm taking us to win by a 1-goal margin.
My heart always says Newcastle United to win, but I'm going to go for a draw. I just think there's something about Goodison that Newcastle don't like. And I know, obviously, they got beat the last time out there, but the time before that, I think they did pick up a win. I there's just something about Goodison that leaves me a little bit worried. So I'm going to go for a draw. I can see a couple of goals for either side in it. 2-2 is going to be my prediction. But hey, John, if they win on Saturday, that would take them to 14 points from their first 7 games, only losing once. That is a tremendous start to the season, especially considering how poorly they've actually been playing.
And through to the last 16 of the League Cup as well, which would be quite something. And that's what's got to drive them on at Everton, and that's what Eddie will be getting into them about. We're going to come to the international break. You boys have taken a bit of stick this season. I'm not talking about the press. I'm talking about fans. And I'm not talking about our own fans, because they are very, very loyal. But throughout the country, everybody wants to say, oh, Newcastle on the side. They were a couple of seasons ago when they finished 4th top, etc., etc. But if we get to the international break with 1 defeat in the league, those points in the top 4, 5, 6, and through to the last 16 of the League Cup, that's not shabby. That is not shabby. But to do that, we can't be talking about it being not shabby if we're talking about 2 defeats. Because then we're talking about 2 defeats and we're saying, well, in the main, we haven't played great sides outside of Spurs and Manchester City, and we've got good sides to come, like Chelsea twice and Arsenal. So I'm looking for us to win. I'm looking for, above all, we've used the word regularly, Andrew, performance. But you know what? And it equates to the same thing, but I want to use a different word, not performance. I want to use the word attitude. If we have the right attitude, a performance will come out of that and a win will come out of that. But it's attitude. Even if we won ugly through having a terrific attitude for 90 minutes, I would take that before the international break. The word that we have got to tattoo on our foreheads, each and every one of them, the word across the forehead, attitude. Get that right, and we'll get 3 points.
Fingers crossed that will happen. And Newcastle pick up 3 points at Goodison Park on Saturday evening, the last visit for Newcastle United to that famous old stadium before they moved to the brand spanking new one on the banks of the River Mersey. Thanks to John, as always, for popping on to the podcast. You guys get into the comments. Let us know your thoughts on Saturday's game. What are you expecting? And would you play the same team as John and I have picked? Give the video a thumbs up, hit subscribe, leave us a rating and review on the audio-only channel, and head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news. And for myself and John, we'll see you guys next week.
Take care.